Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And I know you're spread out around the room. You are welcome to come closer if you would like to. As I mentioned before, whenever you do speak, just so we can hear you around the room, the button on the right, if you'll press that, it will turn red. That way we can hear you. And then once you're done speaking, if you'll turn it off. So thank you for joining us today for our unincorporated Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan Future Land Use Update. This is our second project advisory team meeting. And go. I will just click it. All right, so today we're going to have an overview of the project, just in case any of you haven't been with us in the past. We're also going to talk about our public survey results, and then we're going to get into some anticipated changes to the future land use update. We're going to have a presentation, and after each presentation, we'll have time for some Q&A. The first section will be talking about our transit-oriented development section. Then we'll look at our commercial locational criteria section. And next, we'll chat about our centers and connections element of the future land use section. At the very end, we'll talk about next steps and how you can stay involved. And we'll have an open Q&A, open discussion for anything we might not have talked about within the presentations. So my name is Amy Elmore. I am a project manager and senior planner with EXP. It's a consulting firm here in Tampa. I am local, and I've lived here for over 10 years now. It is my home. It's an honor to call it my home. I love my community. My family is here, so I'm very invested in this future land use update and honored to be a part of this discussion. So why are we yes? Oh, I apologize. This meeting is being recorded. Thank you so much for letting me know. So why are we here today? We're to talk about the comprehensive plan update. How do we grow? Where do we grow? When do we grow? A comprehensive plan, just to give you a quick overview of that, comprehensive plan is a legally required document. We typically update it about every 7 to 10 years, and it helps to envision future growth, provide consistency, prioritize funding, and protect our resources. Currently, we have updated quite a bit of the comprehensive plan, which we're calling Creating Great Places. We've updated the natural open space section, the One Water section, our governance section, except for the public schools portion, as well as our community and built environment section. And so the last major piece of this puzzle is what we're talking about today, our future land use section, as many of you know. We discussed last time a little bit about the process for this future land use update, and I want to cover that just one more time. So right now we are in the summer and fall. We're doing our public workshops, our public outreach, so we can really understand what our community wants, what our community needs, and then that will help to inform our recommendations. Once we have those recommendations done, that will go to our Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will then look at those, and they will make a recommendation themselves, not an adoption, but an actual recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. Then the Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners will have 2 public hearings, a transmittal, and an adoption hearing so that they can talk about these recommendations and formally adopt the future land use update. So a little bit about the update. This future land use is, what is that exactly? As many of you know, again, it helps guide purpose and character of growth. It separates land into general categories, and it sets the maximum density and range of uses. And our future land use is guided by the Hillsborough County Planning Commission. Then we have our zoning aspect. Zoning specifically regulates building size, setbacks, specific uses. It can approve or deny developments, and it defines specific districts within general categories. Now, this is organized by our Hillsborough County Planning Department, and together the Planning Commission and the Planning Department use that future land use and zoning to maintain health, safety, and welfare by separating those incompatible land uses. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Melissa Zornita to talk a little bit about our urban service area within our future land use section. Melissa.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Zornita. I'm the Executive Director of the Planning Commission and really appreciate that you all are spending your Tuesday evening with us. So the urban service area, as many of you in this room are familiar with, is a tool that's been in the comprehensive plan since the early 90s. It is a boundary around where we are focusing urban levels of infrastructure and urban and suburban levels of growth. And on the map, it is the red area. So those areas are outside of the city, but are inside the urban service area line. And that urban service area line has been a tool to prioritize infrastructure improvements and decisions about where growth would go for the last 30 years. It hasn't had many significant changes in that time. There have been a few privately initiated amendments to expand the urban service area, the largest of which was, I don't know if I can make it point here, but right here on State Road 60 east of Dover Road, there was an amendment in 2010-11 to expand the urban service area for an energy industrial park in that area. It has not been developed yet, but that was the largest expansion that we've had because that was a couple thousand acres, I think. The plan says that 80% of our growth should go into the urban service area. And the point of that goal is to try to ensure that we continue to have a choice of ways people can live in Hillsborough County. We want to have opportunities for urban and suburban living within the urban service area and option for rural living outside the urban service area. So one of the things we've been looking at is how much land is still available for development within the urban service area. And I'm sharing this because it provides some context to the conversations that we're going to have about transit-oriented development, about centers and connections, which are very oriented towards infill and redevelopment within the urban service area. At the next meeting in August, we're going to talk a bit about looking at strategically expanding the urban service area, but I think showing you this data will help you understand why we need to really focus and use the remaining land efficiently within the urban service area. So within, these charts are probably pretty hard to read, so we'll make sure that they're posted on the website and links shared to you all. But this talks about the amount of acreage of developable, which means land that is vacant and is available for development of any size acreage. And in total within the urban service area, in addition, in this chart, it also includes parcels that are considered redevelopable. And we use certain criteria as indicators for what might be ready to redevelop. So a property that has structures over a certain age, that has a low structure value but a high land value, those are some indicators that that site might be ripe for redevelopment. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball and we don't know for sure how much we'll redevelop, but within the urban service area, we've got about 33,282 acres of redevelopable or developable land. But as you see, most of the developable and redevelopable acreage is actually in the rural service area. So if we're going to accommodate all the population and growth that is coming to our area, we need to utilize the land that is within the urban service area, as well as that's in the cities, which we're working on their plans as well, efficiently to maximize the opportunities for people to live and work within those areas, as well as begin to look at expanding outward, because that land is a finite resource. We do not have an infinite supply of that here.
So as delineated, can you go back to that?
Sure. Yep.
As you're communicating, there are 33,282 acres still developable within the existing urban service area.
Yeah, let me show you some of the details about those lands though, because a lot of them are very small acreage. So we'll just, let me show you on the map. So the map is probably even harder to read, but and if you want to get right up close, you're welcome to. But this shows by different colors. The purple is the developable and the orange is the redevelopable. But as you can see, most of the land is very scattered and very small acreages. There are a few, like the Energy Industrial Park out there on State Road 60, jumps out as purple because it's developable and nothing's ever happened there. There are a couple of larger parcels in southern Hillsborough County. Many of them are part of developments of regional impact, and so have some entitlements already to them. So they've been approved, like the area just west of 75 is all part of a large DRI that is in the Waterset development. So we do have some charts that break down this acreage. So of that 32,000 that I mentioned, we've got about 17,900 of it is developable. So there's nothing on it. It can be built on today. But as you see, the vast majority of that is less than 20 acres in size. So those are small parcels that are going to be challenging perhaps to build on. They might need some incentives to want to choose that over going and building on something that's big and easy and green somewhere. And they probably have more neighbors nearby them because they're in the middle of existing development or surrounded by existing development. So that can pose some challenges in the development review process, as probably we've all been involved in a hearing where we have had, there have been neighbors who haven't really liked what's developing around it. Yeah, go ahead.
So there's still 17, almost 18,000 acres.
Yes.
In the urban service area that you classify as developable, and you're defining developable as over 20 acres. Is that what you said?
Well, no, developable is any acreage, but as you can see in this breakdown, just over 6,000 of those acres are less than 5-acre parcels. And then another close to 5,000 of them are between 6 and 20 acres. So that's my point, is I guess it's close to 11,000 of those acres are under 20-acre parcels. So there's not a lot that's big. And so just as we're looking at the tools to accommodate growth, these are just some of the facts that are important for us to consider. Yes, sir.
Following up on that then, would you classify those properties that are either under 5 acres or the 6 to 20 acres infill, that there's already uses, that land is already being put to some use, but maybe not the most productive use? The way you sort of described it, maybe old buildings.
Well, no,
really,
these parcels are
those?
Considered vacant and developable. So it might be that they still have farming, agriculture on them. They do not. Developable acres, yes. Yes.
How did you identify what's developable or not? Just by the zoning of whether there was a property on the land or whether it was zones for development? How did you
We
identify this as
Yeah,
developable?
we use data from the property appraiser based on what is existing on the property. So we have not taken into account their zoning. So some of these acreages already are zoned for something. And for example, the energy industrial park that's about 1,000 or more acres of this, it has zoning for something. It's just not been built. So it still counts as developable acreage because it doesn't have anything built on it right now.
Okay, so basically if it's vacant land without a single like home property or home development on it is categorized as developable?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I
Yes.
think she asked the same thing. I just noticed that there's a lot of dead zones, like on Highway 60, big plazas that are empty, or any of that taking, I would think that's very difficult to include in this chart.
Right.
But is that ever a consideration?
Mhm.
Because there's, there may be a AMC theater that's not working anymore for
Right.
the area. And they're large buildings with large parking lots.
Yes, so that is included. There's a perfect transition to my next slide, so thank you. In the redevelopable acreage. And so this is what we've identified as redevelopable. So those are parcels that might have a really small building and a whole lot of land around them. The building has a pretty low value. The land is worth a lot. So that starts to tell us, that might be a candidate for redevelopment. Now, that's all up to the property owner. Some of them may not want to redevelop, but here we've identified just over 15,000 acres that are potentially redevelopable. And, but again, the majority of them are less than 5-acre parcels. So they're smaller pieces, probably many of them along commercial strip development, like along State Road 60 or Hillsborough Avenue, where there's older commercial that might transition. Some areas around the port show up on the map because they have a lot of parking and open land that still could be filled in with additional office and warehousing. So not all of the land that we identify as either developable or redevelopable can be used for residential. Some of it might be in industrial areas, areas where we need employment. So we look at all of that in the mix to identify how much growth we can absorb in the urban service area and when we need to start thinking about tools to encourage it in the right places and encourage this kind of redevelopment, because we've got some opportunity here for redevelopment in unincorporated Hillsborough County, but we haven't seen a lot of that start to happen. A lot is happening in the city of Tampa, but not as much has happened in the unincorporated county. So maybe we need some tools to incentivize it and encourage that to happen. And then knowing that the supply of land is limited in the amount of population growth and job growth that we need to accommodate. Again, at our next meeting, we'll start to talk about looking at how do we strategically think about expansion of the urban service area and plan properly for that if we're going to do that. Yeah.
All right. Just a clarification.
Mhm.
15,000 acres that are redeveloped.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the 33,000?
Yes. Yeah.
So of the 33,000, half of it is classified as redevelopment.
Mm-hmm.
And a little over half is vacant land that has potential for the
Right. Right. And then of that, probably a good close to half of it are those smaller parcels. And I want to acknowledge part of the reason that we're looking at some incentives, and you'll hear about that in the TOD and in the centers and connections, is because there are also challenges to infill and redevelopment in terms of how development occurs on smaller sites and accommodating all the things that have to be accommodated, like parking and stormwater and all that sort of stuff. So that's part of why we're looking at some tools like this. And I thought it was important for you all to have the context of some of this data going into that discussion. Yeah, go ahead.
Just because you brought it up, and And I just think it's important when we go into that discussion that we make note, if we push that line of the urban line, developers will always choose land that's free and vacant and having houses, it's a bigger profit. If we don't hold the line and we don't push incentives that line is not going to go, they're always going to choose cheaper, bigger profit outside of that line rather than redevelop Brandon, redevelop all the other areas that have to be redeveloped and things like that, because it's less profit, more work. So why do that? And I'm out there, I see it all the time. So I want us to be really careful, like when we talk about the line, the urban line, and how we develop, because land is precious, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be all urban. We can protect the rural and say you can develop there 5 acres.
Yeah.
And simple as that, that's the zoning. So I just want us to be careful, because I can tell you right now, I'm surrounded, I live on the line, and we are surrounded by huge developments that are past the urban line. We have no water. Water is a serious issue. Congestion and crash rates are a serious issue. So just as we move into that incentive part, I think it's really important that we're very careful of how we do that and we're strategic about it for the community. But thanks. I know it's
No,
kind
I
of
think
off
those
topic.
are those are good points. And I want to add to that one of the things that we can probably look at in the next meeting when we talk about the rural area is that there have been a lot of rural scale subdivisions that have gone into the rural areas around you in Lithia, in Thanona Sassa, that have built with 1 acre or half-acre lot subdivisions. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great for people to have that choice, but the infrastructure demands may be more similar to the urban service area, and it may be a more efficient utilization of some of that land for them to build at an urban level. So it's something for us to consider, is how, because again, the land is not infinite, and I think it's really important that we continue to have choices within Hillsborough County, that we continue to have a rural, suburban, and urban choice. So we don't want all the rural area to become subdivisions either. So it's a balance, and I appreciate that y'all are willing to be part of the conversation with us. I saw Allison first, and then you, sir.
Thank you. Just for clarification, on these very small parcels that are the redevelopable parcels, does that include just like a single family home on a 1/4 acre that may be like waterfront or something? Because I'm listening to the criteria where the land's valuable, the house may not be. So I'm just trying to get an image of what some of those might be.
Don't think that we included single family homes in that, but I will double check that.
Okay. That would just change my perception as we're talking through it. So
Sure. I'll double check in the notes.
okay, perfect.
Yeah. And then, sir,
I just wanted to second what she said, because I've communicated to Andrea in an email that I sort of would like a priority of the report that ultimately comes out of all this is to do what we can within the next 20, 25 years to have that urban service area not expand, to find ways through incentives or clever planning or carrot and stick to accommodate whatever growth happens within that boundary. Because like you say, the land's not infinite. And once you develop it, it's gone. It's not green anymore. It's not usable for agriculture or for whatever things that we can't predict now in the future. So I just like that would be one of my priorities, is somehow to have that boundary that you put on the urban service area not expand in the result of this report. We find ways to find it not to stay in place.
okay. Thank you for your feedback. Yeah, in August we will the PAT takes a break in July, and then at the August meeting we're going to be focused on that very issue of what we're looking at in terms of potential expansion and some other rural area topics at that meeting. All right, well, I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to talk a little bit about the survey results.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Yeah, excellent feedback, everyone. I truly appreciate that. And as Melissa mentioned, we'll definitely dive deeper into especially the when and the how we grow at our August meeting. So, and we'll have also the public meeting and the virtual meeting as well if you can attend. So just another recap about how we work together. So we have our long-range transportation plan that is organized by our Hillsborough Transportation Planning Organization. We have our transit development plan that's organized by HART. And then we have our comprehensive plan, what we're talking about today. And then we have our land development code, that zoning portion that is organized by the Hillsborough Planning Department. And we also collaborate with a lot of other plans across the board. So like Melissa was saying, we're considering a lot of different factors and collaborating with a lot of different organizations to make sure that we can provide, create those great places within our county. So we did do a survey. Thank you for those of you who participated. We had some wonderful results. We had over 1,800 survey participants and 32,000 data points. So that was some wonderful data that we were able to get from that. Most of 48% of the participants were Caucasian. We did have a little over 10% who were BIPOC, and then 42% preferred not to answer. We also had 43% who work full-time, 13% who were retired, and 35% preferred not to answer, and that's fine too. Yes. Absolutely. No problem at all. No, yeah, sounds good. So we asked on that survey, what are your top priorities? And overall, we found that a lot of people wanted to preserve natural areas, preserve infrastructure and development, prioritize infrastructure and development, maintain agriculture and rural lands, and have a variety of mobility options. Those were our top 4. When we asked about the strategy for inward growth within the urban service area, people found that it was most important for maximizing existing infrastructure. The least important was a variety of housing types. However, 25% of our participants ranked that at number 1. So we've still found that that was extremely important to people, even though it did rank the lowest. When focusing again on that inward growth within the urban service area, maximizing existing infrastructure came out of 4.36 out of 5. Safe walking and biking was also ranked very high. Being close to daily needs was ranked high, and a variety of housing types. As you can see, it was a little bit lower, but still pretty up there in our priorities.
Could you remind us, maximizing infrastructure, how that was couched within the survey?
How that was discussed within the survey? Sure. So basically we had, let me see if I can find a picture of it. You can see here on the right is a picture of that survey. And so people were able to look through and actually drag and drop their priorities from bottom to top. They were able to use the star feature, give them 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars to tell us what their priorities were. And then there were definitions and links that you could go to be able to learn more about each of those topics. And then at the very end, they were able to actually place a pin specifically on places on a map where they had priorities and had comments. So this is kind of an amalgamation of all of those different data points, those 32,000 data points that we got. This is kind of some of the baseline results of what we saw.
I appreciate the explanation of how you got the survey results. It was specifically the definition people utilized when they clicked infrastructure. What were they clicking for?
For the maximizing existing infrastructure, and Katrina, you may have a more specific answer on that one. I believe it was mainly the infrastructure as far as transportation.
I probably would have water and sewer. I
water
I
and
looked that
sewer.
up to give you the exact definition to make sure that I gave you the right definition there, but it was roadway, probably water and sewer as well. So maximizing all those different types of infrastructure, and we'll make sure to follow up and get you that exact definition using the Metro West.
Perfect. Yeah, we can. Thank you, Katrina. Yes, Clara.
I'm questioning if schools were listed as part of the infrastructure. I don't remember.
If schools were specifically listed as
Part of-
maximizing existing infrastructure as
Mhm.
part of that,
Correct.
I'm not sure, but we can definitely take a look at
I
that.
don't think that they were, but we will double check that for you and get the exact definition to you.
If they weren't, shouldn't they have been?
I think that's a fair point. It's something we could consider for future surveys.
Also,
Yeah.
water. I
Definitely
understand
water, yeah.
water is going to be as pricey as land in the future. Already almost there.
Yeah,
And
that's a
that
great
should have
point.
been part of the infrastructure. I mean, if we can't
It should
If we
be.
can't quench the thirst of new visitors that become
Right.
permanent,
Yes.
how can we sustain? And if this is all about sustainability, I'm concerned that the infrastructure all around is not strong enough to bear the burden of, what did you say, 350,000
350,000 new
new
people.
people in the
Mhm.
coming future?
In the next 20 years, I believe.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to take a bath.
Yeah, so I believe maximizing infrastructure did include that water element. Again, Katrina will just make sure of that. But, we do understand that all of those things that was ranked most important, right? So we definitely want to ensure that we are prioritizing maximizing our existing infrastructure, including our water, including our roads, all of that. So that's excellent feedback that we'll make sure to take with us within this conversation and put in our notes here as well. With the public school section, I will say that is its own component. So we're going to do a lot of great outreach and a lot of great, get some great information when we do that public schools component on its own. All right, so when considering outward growth within the urban service area, one of the most important things people said was that they wanted to minimize our impacts to the environment. That goes back to your sustainability, right? And the least important was the access to major highways. The question was, how important is each strategy when considering outward growth, so outside the urban service area? And we found that a lot of participants said they wanted to minimize impact to the environment. And the least ranked priority was access to major highways.
I think there's a clarification I have to make there as well,
Okay.
because I don't believe that.
Okay.
I guess what you're trying to say is they're saying that it's least important for them to have access to things like Interstate 75 or US 301, et cetera. But they're not saying that they want access to decent roads, right of ways, and highways.
Correct. Exactly. It's not absolutely. So still maximizing existing infrastructure, maximizing those connections to be able to walk safely, bike safely, get to your local shops and your local stores, have that connectivity, but not the access to major highways, like you said.
So I wouldn't overemphasize that least important. I would put a lot of emphasis on that point.
Okay, excellent.
With the environment, like one thing I haven't seen, it'd be interesting to see a map like we saw earlier, but that showed here are the protected green spaces. These are spaces that can never be developed, right? Because they're preserves or national parks or county parks or whatever, just to see how then that may influence other decisions. Like we're constrained because some percentage of our county or the urban service area is devoted green spaces. Because I also would think a lot of people might say, I want to preserve the environment, as this kind of abstract notion,
Mhm.
but I want a Walmart nearby.
Right.
Because, I hear that in Apollo Beach when people talk there and like, because one of the developments was rumored to be a Walmart supercenter by us, and people were like, well, I don't want to drive 30 minutes to Walmart. Well, you shouldn't move to Apollo Beach if if you wanted, I want the green space, but I want a Walmart next door. And
Right.
those two things are realistic desires people have. I mean, in reality, those are desires people have, but they are impractical desires people have.
Yeah.
And so if possible, I would like to see, like, here's the green spaces within the urban service area that can never be developed for whatever reason. And then here's how the county plans to add more to that. Because I haven't heard talk yet of like how much in development is devoted to park space. In Waterset, they're putting in a big sports complex, but I'd like to see like how much is devoted to parks and recreation areas that some people kind of put into that environment category. It shouldn't really belong there, but they put it there because it's green and has big trees in it, right?
Yeah, we can definitely talk more about that, especially at the August meeting.
And just another question on that concept about parks and recreation, and there's the ELAP type properties.
Yep.
Are they part of your 17,000 acres that are developable?
No, we're definitely not. Because there are a lot of rules around those that they cannot
But
be
you're
built
not
on.
including that as open space that's potentially developable.
It's definitely not developable. We do not even include parcels the part of parcels that have wetlands on them, because the policy is not to build on the wetlands.
I'm just clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah, no, good.
7,000 acres.
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
Joe.
I just wanted to add, with the ELAP, we can put, the map is online, and we can layer it over the urban service areas so you can see, and it's more extensive than people realize. So we have an issue, like where I live, we're intertwined with the ELAP and protected lands and protected springs, and we are having a very difficult time protecting it. And I was the only one to speak at a county meeting. They put me in the wrong spot, so I didn't even get to speak to protect the land. So it is vital for people to know where their ELAPs are and to know where the lines are, and it's actually, we're having a difficult time protecting it from developers washing it out and being on it and finding ways around the zonings. So we're having a difficult time. So it's not easy for an average citizen to catch everything and to spend the enormous amount of time that it takes for a constituent to be involved. But the map is there, and it's extensive, so you can overlap it and share it with the community. I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Thank you so much, Joe. And like I said, we can definitely work on that for our August meeting and see if we can show some different details about that. Yes, Elizabeth.
This may be a dumb question, but
Not
what is
at all.
ELAP? Is that involving like wetlands, protected lands? What's ELAP?
Yeah,
What's the
it's the
definition?
Environmental Lands Act. What is it?
Oh, okay. It's an
Environmental
act.
Lands
Okay.
Protection Act. Thank
All
you.
right. Sorry, I wasn't.
Not at all.
There's
No,
the
no, no.
EPC, there's,
Yeah.
I didn't know what.
Lots of
ELAP
alphabet soup.
Oh, it's a county thing. I learned something today.
Thank you so much.
And our environmental board is the county commissioners, is that correct?
The environmental board, is that the county commissioners?
Ultimately, any land acquisition for ELAP is approved by the Board of County Commissioners. There is an ELAP committee that reviews the candidate properties and makes recommendations to them on purchases. Yeah, so we have a map, we'll bring it to the next meeting of what is owned by the county as part of that process, what's owned by the state through their environmental lands, as well as what are candidates that they're looking at for that ELAP program. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so this is just kind of a little bit deeper dive into exactly what we were just talking about, minimizing those impacts to the environment, having infrastructure in place, our preservation of rural areas, and compatible land uses. Those are all very important things that our participants from the survey want us to think about as we're considering that outward growth. And with that, we're going to take a minute, we're going to dive into those three components that help to create access to opportunity. That's essentially what we're really trying to do, is that opportunity, bringing people that chance. So our anticipated changes with our future land use section, most of them are minor streamline changes or typographical errors. And then today, we're going to talk about those three components we discussed earlier, our transit-oriented development element, our commercial locational criteria, and our centers and connections. And then at our August meeting, we'll be talking about that timing of growth and expansion area and any other preliminary feedback that we've received so far. And again, throughout the fall, throughout until next year, we're actually going to be doing consistent public involvement, consistent meetings, so that you have lots of opportunities for participation. Before I turn it over, I do just want to mention we're going to have a presentation by each individual, and then after that presentation, we'll have a section for open Q&A where you can kind of ask all of those great questions that you might have for that particular person on that topic. I do ask that you kind of save each question for those specific sections. And then at the very end of our presentation, we'll have an open discussion for anything else that we might not have covered. Andrea, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add for this slide, our June community meetings will go over the same information as the August PAT meeting. So you don't have to come to all those meetings if you don't want to, unless you just want to come say hi. But the August PAT will go into more detail than the June community meeting. So you just put that August 8th date on your calendar. And then the final community meetings where we wrap up everything will be the beginning of November.
All right, and with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sophia to talk about our transit-oriented development section.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Sophia Garantiva, and I'm a senior planner with the Planning Commission. And I am here to give you a little bit of information on the transit-oriented development policy that's being included in this update. So first off, this is an existing policy, and we're basically just clarifying and simplifying the existing language to make it more streamlined. It is incentive-based. As was previously mentioned, it's one of the tools that we're looking at. And again, incentive, not a requirement. So basically, what is transit-oriented development? The comp plan defines it as urban places designed to bring people, activities, buildings, and public space together with walking and cycling connections between them and transit. So in other words, it concentrates development around transit and gives folks access to multiple modes of transportation and access to services. So in this policy specifically, transit refers to a fixed guideway. So, or transit is fixed guideway. So that means that the route and the stops going along these routes are not easily movable. So a bus line, a normal bus line would not qualify, would not be considered as something that a TOD development could be developed on. Something that would be considered that's existing as an example would be something like the streetcar in the city of Tampa. Another example specific to unincorporated would be maybe the university area up by USF. That would be a place that this could possibly occur. And again, we're not proposing any specific locations. This is just language to set up those possibilities and set up that option for developers as that type of infrastructure comes online. Next slide. So the following are just some of the specifics of the policy. The TOD policy applies to a half-mile radius around a proposed station stop along this transit route. Remember, it's fixed transit. The policy provides a development option that may afford increased density and intensity. And at this point in time, we're not assigning and we're not looking into specifically the density and intensity. With this update, there are a lot of studies that are going on concurrently that we're waiting to conclude in order to have a better understanding of those types of impacts to this policy specifically. So the density and intensity bonuses would be in exchange for certain design features that promote mobility, a mix of uses, and affordable housing. And this policy, with the slight modifications that we're making, would be adopted into not only unincorporated, but also the city of Tampa, as there are a lot of places where this has a little bit of crossover between the two policies. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm open for any questions.
Yeah.
Oh, we're waiting to the very end or no, after?
No, after each one.
Okay, good. Just
Yeah.
making sure.
I misunderstood. I apologize.
Oh, no.
So I just, if we want to go to the slide when you have the summation of the policy of transit, can we, so in the state of Florida, we have the third highest crash rate in the nation. We have the second highest pedestrian death rate in the nation consistently for 8-10 years. And so if anyone follows Dangerous Designs, the annual report that's constantly coming out, one of the biggest factors is dangerous designs, which is we're very guilty of. Can we include, as the TOD in defining, to add in some of that language inclusive of the wording that the design of all of those public, like the pathways for those public spaces, to increase safety and the well-being of community members? For example, if you build a sidewalk right next to a high-speed roadway that's going 55 or 45, if it's 45, everyone's doing 65 or 55, but there's no buffers between the pedestrians and the roadway. Like there's no bushes, there's no trees, there's no separation. You're increasing your pedestrian crash rates. I lost a very close, a military wife, friend of mine who's hit running on a sidewalk. And we know in here, we have many tragedies every day, including our child pedestrians on their path to school. So I'm very involved in that. And then, so if we can add the wording to safe design, decreasing, add that as part of what is defining the TOD.
That's definitely something we can consider for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And then in the policy inclusive, so also the transit development is not speaking about the public schools. And I want to speak about the public schools in this sense. So there's 220 sites of public schools. When Hillsborough County Public Schools decreased access to public school buses in 2017, I want everyone to think about driving now in the summer during going to work and driving when school opens. So that's all because of the parent car lines that are stopping the flow of traffic. So only 20% of our students are transported by the school bus, which is 7,000% safer than any other mode of transportation. It actually saves students' lives. We have to have a plan in the county, in transit, to be inclusive of getting over 180,000 cars off the road during high traffic hours. And remember, those transportations to schools are happening, it starts at 7 a.m. and it doesn't end until 6 p.m. because everything is, we have elementary, middle, and high school starting and stopping at the same time. We actually spend more money as constituents, approximately $1,500 a year, between the increase in our car insurance, our gas, and congestion, than paying for the school bus, which is $4 a day. Like literally. So it's really bad public policy. I would rather take my taxes and have the county create a shared plan to have every child on the school bus and get those cars off the road and decrease crashes. But we don't even talk about it in the plan. And so I wonder if we can talk about that. And then in the bike, so I think in the safe ways, I don't like when bikes are on, like there's no buffers between our cyclists, but that's me. But I mean, if we add the safety part in the definition, but we have to add the transportation of students, because it detrimentally impacts the congestion in Hillsborough County. It impacts everyone's life daily. I can tell you it's a parking lot in many places when school opens for at least 2 months. So, but I don't know how you would do that in the language, but if it's something you would think about. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No, those were great comments.
I want to say that I always like having Joe at these meetings. She comes with the receipts, but always really insightful, always really useful and really powerful information. I'm really surprised to see this slide. I'm from Los Angeles, and so, we have a subway there that was ridiculously expensive, but otherwise you're on a bus. But I just came from Toronto, where you could get everywhere you wanted to go on the subway or the streetcar, right, on the tram. And so, is there a map that goes with this? Is it the centers and whatever map, centers and connections map that shows like where you? I'm surprised that a city like Tampa is talking about building a network of fixed guideway.
So I just want to clarify, we're not talking about proposing fixed guideways themselves, just
Right.
preparing the language for the land around those stations once that conversation moves forward in that direction.
But that means you can imagine a world in which a southern metropolitan area has a sensible mass transit network in place. Because I don't know that exists. In the southern United States, I don't know that exists.
I mean, there's still a lot of time. I mean, these plans are 20-year periods. And again, it's just another tool that we're looking at. If we want to concentrate a lot of the growth maybe in our more urban areas, this is just another way to kind of look at things.
That's one of the keys of concentrating that growth, is having really reliable, usable, friendly transportation that's not a bus. People won't ride buses. My experience is people just don't want to get on a bus. There's a lot of class bias against buses, et cetera. But I applaud that. I would love to see that. I mean, I'm in Apollo Beach, and I'd love that train line that runs along 41 had a streetcar on it. I'd jump on it and go to Ybor City on that instead of driving up there. So I applaud that, and I applaud Joe.
Thank you.
Not to be
Yes.
Oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, not to be disagreeable, but people, in my experience, do ride buses, at least in some places. DC is a good example of that. Living in DC for 20 years, plenty of people rode buses there. And I think the Sunrunner over in Pinellas has gotten quite a lot of attention because of ridership. So it depends on how you create it, right? How you build it. And one of the questions I have here is, so you're developing, or you're using the definition of TOD with fixed guideway, and the only thing in the area right now that would apply is the streetcar in the city of Tampa, so it's not even.
Yeah, that was just the example, correct, yeah.
So I guess, so then I think you also mentioned we can anticipate at some point in the future, maybe plans rolling out that would create a system with fixed guideways. Can you elaborate a little bit on what we can expect in that space?
So the only one that is even being referred to right now, potentially, might be the bus rapid transit. But again, it's just very preliminary stages, and that is something that is monitored by HART. But Elizabeth is here. Did you want to talk about that?
Add a little bit about what you were just saying.
Yes, because she actually works with HART more closely than I do, so I'm actually going to let you fill that in before I misspeak.
Exactly what Sophia was saying. So yes, there are no TODs right now in unincorporated Hillsborough County, but HART has plans for an arterial bus rapid transit system. And really what bus rapid transit means is it's a bus and a dedicated lane, so it can move faster, and it falls under that definition of fixed guideway. So in unincorporated Hillsborough County, one area this could be applied in the next 20 years is along the university area, along Fowler, to connect the university to downtown. So this is one opportunity to use this policy in the future.
Great, that's helpful. And one last question related. I know there's been some discussion about creating ferry transit between various locations along the shore here in Hillsborough to either MacDill or to St. Pete. Would this also apply there?
So you were very savvy. Ferry does fall under that a category of fixed guideway, but it's in the coastal high hazard area, so we don't want to encourage development. So it's unlikely that a TOD would result in a ferry station, just given the vulnerability to flooding and storm surge.
So are buses in general from HART included in the TOD under fixed guideway at all, or just the rapid?
So yeah, I would only qualify for this fixed guideway, which HART does not have any service today. And what fixed guideway means, it has its own lane. The bus stops are further apart, so it can go faster. We just don't have that today, but that's in HART's plans to have that eventually.
Okay, and just to share for East and South County, when the tax referendum came around, the biggest push of East and South County, and I'm going to say unincorporated Hillsborough in general, the constituents, is they weren't going to get the service. So I think if we don't include like service that would even have rapid service to all the healthcare facilities, that every constituent has access to the bus, not just slices, we're not going to get the ridership where, we know that if the bus comes every 15 minutes, everyone will hop on because it's like, oh, I just missed it 15 minutes. I don't have to take my car. But no one's giving plans for unincorporated Hillsborough. So that large percentage of your constituents and taxpayers don't want to pay taxes for something they're not going to get that's only going to go to Tampa. So I guess my input is, if we're going to do the fix, is there a way to add that that it would be more inclusive of the other constituents in unincorporated Hillsborough? I don't know if you can, but that's my suggestion.
That's a great point. And I guess just I'd like to emphasize that TOD and fixed guideway is just a little bitty portion of the important need for transit service. There is incredible demand in South County. Right now, there's a flex route that gets great ridership. And maybe TOD, this every 5-10 minute service wouldn't work in South County, but that doesn't mean it doesn't need bus service or other options to get around. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I don't think these policies would preclude that. But obviously something to continue to keep in the forefront of our mind of how important these options are.
And I think there's a question.
I just didn't get the entire statement you said about the ferry service, and I just really wanted you to restate that one more time.
Yeah, so fixed guideway transit is essentially defined as areas where you can't move the route very easily. So ferry falls under that because you're not going to move a dock, with just a change in policy. Like, that is an investment in a specific route. The reason we wouldn't apply these TOD developments, because this is encouraging more density, more uses, having more people there. And those areas along the coastline are more vulnerable to storm surge and flooding. And I think there's a land use policy that discourages additional density. So that's why why TOD doesn't really apply in that area.
So it just doesn't apply at this point in time.
Given just like the land, I don't know, Melissa, maybe the more accurate way to say that.
No, I mean, typically, we're not trying to encourage additional population in the coastal high hazard area. That's the most vulnerable area. It's the area that evacuates under a hurricane category 1, and so is most likely to have flooding and other vulnerabilities in a storm. So we're not trying to put more people in harm's way. Now, I will say in the city of Tampa, we're looking at, as part of their land use update, at some changes to that, because more and more of the city of Tampa is becoming in the coastal high hazard area. And there are, large population centers like where we are right now that are, we want to continue to encourage density in. So we're looking at other ways in the city to start to mitigate some of those impacts. If we increase density, are there other things that we can do in terms of making the structures and the ways that people evacuate more resilient to those storms? So it's not to say it's never a possibility, but under current policy, we wouldn't be encouraging more density for a ferry stop, say in Gibsonton right now. Now, that doesn't mean that they might not get some incentives for putting non-residential uses around those stops, because those might be able to, it might be a good location for some employment and things like that, where it's not impacting people's homes and it's still vulnerable, but it's different vulnerabilities, I guess. So
Well, thank you for clarifying.
Okay, sure. That was a long answer, sorry.
This might sound a little odd, but I'm questioning, since we're talking about safety and this is a futuristic drawing up of process, if the terminology truck routes could be incorporated into this. In other words, if we're talking about children and family safety as they sit and wait for a transport in the future, who knows, maybe it'll be some fancy jet model, something that does something super and whistles and bells. Truck routes can be a bit of a problem when you have large trucks crossing those areas. And so I would like to reference truck routes as a part of the safety factors so that truck routes not be allowed to go by children and families that are waiting. unsuspecting?
Hello, my name is Katrina Corcoran. I'm a senior planner. You mentioned truck routes, so I'll get to this in a little bit on my portion, but we did do an update to the county's comprehensive plans mobility section, and we do have some language on truck routes in there, making sure that it's not encroaching on neighborhood areas, looking at the truck route plan that is established outside of the comprehensive plan. So that is addressed just in a different section. So I
Okay,
wanted to
I'll
add
get
that
back
in
with
there.
you on that. Thank you.
There was one more question. Yes.
But at the same time, I think it's important that you keep in mind that you have to have the trucks. So you have to have the traffic, and you have to have the traffic from, the heavy trucks moving back and forth, moving their goods and getting all the things that we need. So you have to make sure that you take that into account and look out for their needs as well. I agree with the safety aspects. I agree with all of, everything you're saying, but you have to make sure that, so in your thought process, I guess looking at what you're listening to, what it sounds like you're trying to do or we're trying to do, I'm just going to do the best I can to encourage the Planning Commission to think outside the box just a little bit, because there's so much development in all different parts of the county, and I'm from South County, and it's a nightmare. You can't get around. And if you found a way to long-term put in the plan to develop some form of transit that would allow people to travel back and forth from major areas to major areas, or from South County to Tampa or different areas. There's rail systems that are in place that have been there for decades and years, and they're underutilized in many of the cases now. So I think you need to look outside the norm. You need to think outside the box, and you need to think that there's more to this county than just the city of Tampa and the urban service area. But as we grow, we need to plan in the plan as we grow to have some form of mass transit. Even if, there was a transmission line, for instance, that was used, or a railroad track, that used to go through all the way around the south end of the county, and the access existed for years. And I don't know, I think most of that, part of that's been taken up for transmission, TECO and others using it for transmission access, et cetera. But there are arteries that currently exist, is my point, that are in the county. And someone needs to take a look at what's there and then think outside the box and say, what can this be? How can this be utilized for the betterment and, for the best, in the best interest of the growth strategies going forward?
I just wanted to share, because I agree, and as an agency, over the last 10, 15 years, we've done a number of studies of that. The long-range transportation plan includes and has contemplated there being a more robust mass transit system for quite some time that includes fixed guideway transit. We've done studies of transit out to Plant City, studies of South County circulator studies. We have a lot of plans and studies about transit. The difficulty is, and I'm just being real transparent with you all, is how does it get paid for and how is it funded and operated? I think we've probably all read in the paper about the challenges that HART has right now. And so I think that there are a lot of things that are on the shelf ready to go when there's the money to operate them or to build the facilities. It's just that's really been where the stumbling block has been for this community. And that's just what it is. But I don't want it. I want you all to know that we definitely are looking at those things and have been for quite some time. We know that there are needs. We did a Brandon corridors, east-west corridors study where we identified where a bus rapid transit could go out towards the hospital in Brandon, connect that to the mall, and then bring people downtown. we have those, we just don't have the buses and the means to operate it all.
But I think, I think that's the real value of planning, because you put it in the plan and you do a good job on putting it together and making it a feasible plan, and then it becomes a reality. When it's an afterthought.
Yeah.
Or, when it's down the
just takes a
road
long
and
time.
it's an afterthought, then it costs the taxpayers
Yeah.
a lot more money to do,
Sure,
as
sure. And I
opposed to
think
just
that's,
thinking ahead.
yeah. And that's a great point, as particularly as if we start to think about, looking at other areas of growth, making sure those things are done at the same time as the growth occurring, as opposed to having to now retrofit into an area like Brandon, where it's harder, perhaps. Yeah, good point.
Yep, go ahead.
Just one comment. I think this is really smart, because I remember when we talked about rail between Tampa and Orlando and so forth, and so there are all these conversations going on, and I kept going, sure, you can get to one and then the other, but where do you go then? You've got to get a car or an Uber or something else. So if you start to develop these smaller areas, then you can develop, assuming the plans are being developed, but you can then start to connect them longer term. It seems like the right first step. So that's all I wanted to share.
Thanks. And that was a good example of incremental planning. So thanks. If there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to, I believe, who's doing CLC? You're doing CLC? To Andrea.
Good evening, everybody. Andrea Pappinger, Senior Planner of the Plan Hillsborough. You've probably seen one of my many emails. Hopefully I've not been annoying you too much. So I'm going to talk about commercial locational criteria. You might hear it referenced as CLC throughout the evening. So this is commercial locational criteria. It's adopted language in the comprehensive plan today, but it has not been updated since 2008. So in 2021, we started a study to look at how we could update this language. Those recommendations went before the board in a transmittal hearing in January of 2023. And the direction from the board at that time was to fold it into the overall future land use update and get some more feedback from the public. So we've had at least 6 community meetings just on the commercial locational criteria. And then as part of the overall full update, we're bringing it back in for more feedback. So if you haven't been to a meeting on the commercial locational criteria, what it is, it's this framework or kind of requirements for allowing non-residential development. In non-residential development, we're thinking office, commercial, your goods and services, in your residential future land use categories. So the intent is really for residents to meet their daily needs. So gas station, grocery store, like getting your hair cut, and still make sure that the commercial development is compatible with the surrounding residential neighborhoods. So some of the things that are allowed today next to residential are some auto-oriented uses like drive-throughs, car washes, auto repair. It's not always the most compatible with a residential home right next to it. So some of the major revisions that we are looking at based on the feedback that we've gotten from 2021 to this point today, the first one is adding in a new future land use category called neighborhood mixed use 6. So right now, one of our categories in the plan today is neighborhood mixed use 4. So this would be just bumping that up to 6 dwelling units an acre, and a higher FAR of 0.35 from the 0.25 today. And when I'm talking about FAR, I'm talking about floor area ratio. And what that is you're looking at a ratio. So you've got on the bottom the total square footage of an entire parcel, And then the top is the building square footage. So you're looking at, okay, how much of does the building actually occupy of the total land? That's what we would talk about when we're talking about FAR, floor area ratio. So that would allow for commercial, more mixed use without permitting more higher density. Now, you would still have to, as a developer, you would still have to come in and go through the comp plan amendment process since it's a new category, it's not on the map today, and go through that public hearing process to get that category, but it allows an option. We're also looking at how certain audio-oriented uses, like I said before, car washes or drive-throughs, how we can handle those and consider those limitations when we're thinking about putting them next to residential. If you were at one of the public hearings or one of the briefings that we did in 2022, we did present removing those uses from the residential plan categories. There was some concern on completely removing those uses, so now we're coming back just to get more feedback and to see, which direction, kind of reviewing that proposal. We're also reviewing the maximum development size per quadrant in rural and industrial areas. So one of the things that we are thinking about proposing as a change is if you are in, and this only applies to the rural area, not the urban service area. If you're in the rural area and you have a future land use category that's rural or industrial, you would be limited in the maximum square footage per intersection quadrant that you could build. And part of that is because those rural areas have a very different character and development pattern than our urbanized areas. So we are looking at restricting that square footage. If you're in the urban service area, your floor area ratio, which is established today, you would still be able to maximize that. And then our next change we're considering is changing our map. So right now we've got an outdated map called the 2040 cost affordable map. It doesn't even have all the intersections. So if you know where US 301 and Simmons Loop Road is, it's not on the map. So we're going to use a new map that's going to be hopefully updated regularly called the context classification map to determine some of those locations where commercial development could be considered. And I'll show that map and get into that some methodology on that in the next few slides. And then the last major change, node separation. So if you have a non-existing commercial node, but if you have a new commercial development coming in, there should be a minimum distance between the nodes. So we don't want to have strip commercial. You want to have some type of minimum distance that would change based on, like if you're in the rural area, we're looking at 2-mile separation between nodes.
What is strip commercial? Because I hear strip, I think strip mall, but that's not what that means.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Strip commercial is kind of, so when we're thinking of commercial, we want it concentrated at our intersection nodes. As you move away from the node, you'll see like commercial going down the intersection. We want to have it clustered at our main intersection point. So strip commercial refers to commercial that just goes all the way down the roadway and isn't clustered at an intersection. So that node separation, there would be a waiver opportunity available. So if a developer comes in and says, I know there's a separation, but I've got a unique case, or here's my reason for wanting a waiver, they can submit one and staff and the board would consider it.
Is it the board or the land use hearing officer?
So, yeah, you're fine.
Let me repeat that. Is it the board that makes that, or is that the land use hearing officer?
So with our rezoning process, the planning commission staff would make a report, a recommendation. They would review the waiver and say, based on what we've seen, we think that the board should approve or deny. It goes to the zoning hearing master, who reviews the report, hears the testimony, makes their own recommendation, and then it goes to the board for final decision. Oh, you got another question? Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a question. I want to go back to neighborhood mixture use 6.
Yes.
Can you explain that in a little more detail? I don't follow it.
Sure. So right now we've got mixed use, future land use categories that allow a wide range of uses, commercial, residential, kind of everything in between. But we have this category called neighborhood mixed use, and the intent is to allow some commercial, but at a more neighborhood centered scale. And right now we've got a neighborhood mixed use that allows 4 dwelling units per acre and 0.25 FAR, which is our on the lower side. And then going up to a mixed use 6 would allow a developer to do a higher FAR of 0.35 and up to 6 units. So when we were doing this study, one of the things we're looking at is, okay, if we do restrict certain commercial neighborhood uses in residential categories, well, that takes a lot of categories off the table for someone who's trying to develop. So what if we do a new category that gives them a little bit more square footage to work with, but they'd have to apply for it and go through a public hearing process and really show that it fits for the area. So it was kind of trying to make a balance there.
Back to the strip commercial idea,
Yeah.
just so I understand, I'm trying to think of like, picture in my head, like Brandon Boulevard. Is that like, that's a strip commercial, right? Where like, it's just solid rooms to go and Red Lobster and, it's just, it's nothing. And so
Yeah,
you're
like,
trying to avoid that.
You got strip mall after strip mall after strip mall or hotel, and it goes all the way down the boulevard. So what we want to see is really our commercial cluster at our intersections, and have space in between for maybe something like an office or a daycare or public support use, something like that. We have a strip commercial definition in the comp plan. I don't have it memorized, but I can send it to you if that would provide some more clarity. Yeah.
So I'm curious, what is the size for the quadrant reduction on the rural and industrial?
So let me grab that. Yeah. So we do have that restriction, kind of a restriction today that's similar to that, but it's based on the number of lanes. So we'd be taking the lane component out of that and just looking at what that restriction would be per land use category. So for example, if you're in the rural area, like let's say AR, agricultural rural, we look at 20,000, and this is just the proposed draft. It could change. 20,000 per intersection quadrant.
Per all four?
Per all four, yeah, for all four intersections. So
Per-
one intersection has 4 quadrants, so per quadrant would be 20,000.
So that's total.
80,000 total.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's currently 25, isn't it, or no?
For AR, I believe in the comp plan, it's currently 40.
Oh, I don't think it's that big. But why is an industrial concern there?
Well, the industrial concern is that if we want to have land for our industrial employment uses, so if we have commercial take up all the industrial land, then we don't have anything left. So it's trying to minimize the impact of using all the industrial land for commercial. That was the thinking with that. Now this is still draft language, so we're open to any suggestions or ideas or comments you guys have.
Is the distance from an intersection still going to apply, the 660?
Yeah, so that's a great transition to my next slide, actually. So this is what is not changing. So one of those things is the distance from the intersection. So right now, 75% of the site has to be a certain distance from the intersection. We are looking at updating those distances. So the rural area would still be at 660 feet from the intersection. Industrial would be 900 feet. And then as we get into like our Res 4 and higher, it'd be 1,000 feet. So we're still keeping that requirement, but in some cases we've increased the distance to allow more commercial, but to be clustered at our nodes. One of the other things not changing, we're not changing commercial entitlements. If you're entitled to it, you have it today, you still have it when we make these changes. We're not getting rid of the agricultural exemptions. So policy 30.5 that's in the flu today says that if you have a agricultural neighborhood commercial use, think a feed store, you're selling tractors, something like that, you are not subject to these requirements. The community plan language is not changing. So we've got 22 community plans in the comp plan today. Each of them have their own regulations and requirements, and those are not being changed as part of this update. If one of those plans is being updated, it's going to be a separate study and a whole nother process. We're also not changing our mixed use future land use categories. So anything that's in the mixed use, so for example, office commercial 20, you see SMU 6 suburban mixed use 6, those categories, those are exempt today from commercial locational criteria, and we're not changing that. So if you're in one of those higher density mixed use categories, you're exempt from these requirements. These requirements are more for the residential and the rural plan categories. And sorry, SMU 6 is subject to it. I apologize. I was looking at our CMU, our community mixed use 12 designation. And then we're not changing the floor area ratio, and we're not changing the future land use map. So this study for CLC and the whole process is just looking at the text and not map updates at this time.
I'm confused about the floor area ratio. I thought you said it was increasing under the commercial locational criteria to 0.35.
So that would just be if we add that new category. So nothing that is existing today under our categories is changing. But if we add a new category, then that would be a 0.35 FAR. And that's increasing because what we have today is neighborhood mixed use 4. So be adding a new category that would bump it up and allow for another option.
Okay.
So in the first slide, I don't know if you can go back.
Yeah.
When we're talking about specifically the vehicle and commercial, the commercial residential character of the neighborhoods. It also says that in most of the community plans, and it says it's in the future plans, but never honored. It is never honored. So, and this is a suggestion, if we're going to create future plans, language is important. So if we're going to say to maintain the residential character of the neighborhoods, maybe we should add in height and scope and style.
Okay.
Be more definitive in the language in that it's broader, but it's speaking to the height of the building, the scope of the building, the style of the building, the style of the development. You know, so if we're going to have a car wash, of course you can have a car wash, but it must fit in the height, the style, and the scope. If you go to Sanibel, you don't see signs. Well, before the storm, but like, you know, they have trees. Those are their zonings. I understand we're not like that, but if we're going to have a commercial neighborhood future land use, and we want our neighborhoods to look like neighborhoods, and we're speaking specifically to neighborhoods in single family residential or even in rural, it should, because I can tell you, I've been to multiple meetings, and the character of neighborhoods, even though we say it multiple times throughout our planning, never honored. It is never, well, that doesn't matter. We just go to the other stuff. It's zoned for this, you can have it. Even though the design and everything else and the height or whatever is not in scope. So if we can get some language in there to at least say, yes, you can have a car wash. Yes, you can do this, but it must fit into the neighborhood, and more language to say more than character of the neighborhoods. I don't know. I don't know if it'll ever help us, but at least if we could try.
Okay. And then I'm gonna just briefly, because I know we've got another topic after this, I'm gonna briefly touch on some of the map edits that, and this is a draft map. It's just an exercise that, and I have copies if anyone after the meeting wants a draft copy. It's gonna, this is showing is how changing from the old map to the new map will actually allow for more intersections to qualify for commercial. And I say that meaning qualify because it does not mean that if you have a dot on this map that you can build commercial there. All that means is that you can be considered for commercial, but that's more of a second tier. The first tier that has to be met is that you have to meet our compatibility and neighborhood protection policies, and then you have to meet the community plan policies. So for example, Lutz has 3 intersections in their community plan where they want to see commercial. So that will be looked at first. And then this is kind of a second tier. So this doesn't mean that just because there's a dot on the intersection, someone can come in and build a commercial. It just allows for more opportunities because now we have all the intersections on the map as opposed to the old map. And so what this is showing on the screen is the context classification. So that context classification was developed for the roadways by FDOT for their state roads and by our county's community infrastructure planning department. What context classification is, in simple terms, is it places our roadways into categories, and it's based on kind of the land use. So if you are on, you've got rural area, you've got large lots, low density, you're going to have a roadway classified as rural. If you're in a suburbanized area, you've got some medium density, you got your publics, you're going to have a suburban commercial density, context classification, on that roadway. And then if you're in let's say Brandon Boulevard or Brandon Main Street, you have more of an urban general feel, or that's the way the area's based on the plan is moving towards. So this just classifies the roadways into different areas based on the land use. It doesn't impact the land use, doesn't impact the CLC. What impacts the CLC is that if you are at the intersection of two roads that have a context classification on the map, you can be considered for commercial. So we're using these context classifications to see which intersections we can qualify. So if you're not on the map, you're most likely a minor or a minor local road that would not qualify. So, and I do have copies of the map, or it's on our website as well, but the yellow dots indicate the new intersections. So that's moving to this map would qualify 345 intersections to be considered for commercial or non-residential uses. The orange dots are not changing from the old map. And then we have some red dots that are showing actually intersections removed by moving to this new map. And they're removed simply because on the 2040 map, we had roadways planned that were never built. There's not actually a cross roadway to make an intersection, or it doesn't have a context classification today. So that's all I have for this topic. Do you guys have any other questions?
This is tied into something that you showed us about the developable land, or I'm sorry, it was you, and redevelopable land. Those are really great words. But this step here, identifying intersections for commercial use, is potentially flagging properties that are zoned residential, and in areas like where Keystone, Odessa, Lutz, and some of those other places, there are most likely lots of properties that are already zoned commercial and have not been developed yet. So by encouraging more development in these rural areas, it seems like we're kind of going backwards on preserving the rural areas with identifying intersections that aren't commercial currently when it hasn't been built out yet.
Well, all this map shows is that you're at an intersection of two context classifications, so you can be considered
Currently.
for commercial. But if you have a it means if you have a residential zoning, then you're not zoned for commercial, and you have to go through the process.
Well, that's cracking the door open to make it easier to become commercial. You said that earlier. So anyway, I think there are parts of the county in the outside the urban service area that probably really wants that commercial. But in the Keystone, Odessa area, we have an intersection that's undeveloped, and it's currently zoned for a total of 80,000 square feet commercial. So I don't see where that community even needs an additional intersection to be easier to develop as commercial.
Well, that community has a very restrictive community plan that says, I think there's a specific activity center on like North Mobley Road where they want to see commercial. So that community plan would supersede this map, because we'd look at the community plan and say, okay, this is where they want commercial only. So even though there's a dot on this map, it doesn't fit the community plan. So it wouldn't meet all the comp plan requirements, and staff wouldn't be able to support that. So this is a second tier showing basically any intersection in the county, not in a mixed use category, in a residential category where we need criteria for the commercial development so that we can have some safeguards. But we still have to overlay our community plans on top of that.
Okay, thank you.
This is maybe just a more general discussion around overlays for the plan. I know at the last meeting there was a lot of discussion around concurrency, so I'm not going there. But where I'd like to go is you've got roadways, some major roadways that today really are well beyond capacity. They may be, a C or D rating in terms of their level of service. And in discussions with the county, there's no feasible way to widen or expand those roadways in the future because of the parcels that are along them and the width and other general environmental features. So it feels like we should have a look at that and where there's really no feasible way to alleviate or increase the throughput in those areas, maybe back off on some of the policies that would allow for more development and more intensification in those areas, because we're just going to make that problem worse. And then there are other areas where it could be possible to allow more throughput, or the roadways aren't, at their maximum point or beyond their maximum point already. So just a thought, it's not just around this, but we're talking about overlays, and we're talking about, there's a general theme on where we can maximize and where we can grow. So a thought that might want to go into that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it, Andrea. And again, we will have this presentation. We also available if you want to take a closer look at some of these details. And we do have copies of this map specifically, so you can look at that in more detail as well. With that, I'd love to turn it over to Katrina with our Centers and Connections element.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katrina Corcoran, Senior Planner with the Planning Commission, and I'm here today to present on the Centers and Connections concept. And I'm really loving a lot of the questions and the feedback that we're getting, because it really has primed us to talk about this subject. So looking forward to your feedback as we go through this. So what is Centers and Connections, or what are Centers and Connections? We call it CNC for short, and it is a policy approach to implement proposed Goal 4, which you can see here, and that's FLU Goal 4. You can see here on the screen, you can read that, looking at safe, livable, and sustainable communities, having a variety of mobility choices, opportunities for housing, that sort of direction. You can also see our nice graphic that we have here. It's all about expanding choices for living and getting around, looking at proximity, livability, and walkability. So the intent here is to streamline the comprehensive plan process by allowing density and intensity bonuses within certain areas of unincorporated Hillsborough County, essentially directing growth to areas where it is desired and maintainable. Those bonuses would be designed to specific design provisions and required improvements as a part of development, meaning there would be public benefits if someone chooses to utilize that. This approach would be incentive-based, meaning that it would be an option for property owners, but not a requirement. So we wouldn't be forcing anyone to go along with this, but if you do want to utilize that bonus structure, you would be required to meet these various policy requirements. So overall, this approach is intended to incentivize growth in areas where the community wants to see it, while maintaining existing infrastructure and having a variety of choices that Hillsborough County enjoys today, such as urban, suburban, and rural lifestyles. So how did we get here? You've heard a little bit from me earlier about the mobility section. That is within the comprehensive plan for Hillsborough County. Similar to how we're updating this future land use section, it was also updated. It was effective in May 2022. So it updated and streamlined the mobility comprehensive plan policy language. It does include language on context classification that Andrea spoke of earlier, so I won't go into a lot of detail on that. She hit the nail on the head with her explanation, but you can see here this graphic really looking at the roadway and then considering the land use around it. We also have policy language in that mobility section on coordination with HART. So as we were looking at the Centers and Connections concept, we considered a lot of these other concepts that we have in the plan: context classification, collaboration with HART, current and existing transit, also considering what you've heard and seen in the papers about changes at HART, struggles with funding, so making sure that we're considering all of these different types as we're looking at this concept. So how will this work? Again, it will encourage growth in areas where communities desire it by allowing that intensity and density bonuses in specific centers and corridors This would be in line with adopted community plans. We've looked at that as a part of our, you'll see a map in a second, and it's within the urban service area. And it would expand those housing opportunities, improve walkability, and encourage a sense of place. So we all know that we have high population growth along with a number of issues that brings. So for example, increased traffic or lack of diverse or affordable housing. And this approach would help direct to these areas. And you'll see the map again in a second. And before we get to that map, just a little bit of background on it. So you'll see connections. So those are roads that either have an adopted roadway context classification that supports more walkability, or the future land use categories that already support for higher density. You'll notice that corridors in the coastal high hazard area are excluded. So we didn't want to necessarily encourage that residential density in those areas for the direction of our plan. And there would be potential for density bonuses along those corridors. You'll also see centers, and those include major intersections and areas that are identified in community plans for redevelopment or walkability. You'll also notice that centers in the coastal high hazard area, or you'll see some outside of those that we've looked at that are primarily single family residential areas. Those are colored differently. So when you look at the map, you'll see larger blue centers and then smaller green centers, which are the ones that I'm talking about within the coastal high hazard area. Those are focused for more walk-bike improvements rather than increased development. Again, keeping in line with not encouraging the residential density within the coastal high hazard area or areas that are already primarily single-family residential. And there's a potential in these centers for intensity and density bonuses. So without further ado, here's the map. I would like to note that it was a draft as of January 2023, which you can see there. And since then, we've gone through a lot of outreach and received a lot of feedback. We're taking into consideration I think we had over 5,600 data points on this map that we received in the survey period. We had it open for, I think, a little over a month. So this is very much a draft. But if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to have them as we look at all of this data and refine the map. And we do have a poster size version of this map. I also have printouts. You're welcome to take one. If you'd like to take it home, it's available on our website. And the larger map, which may be a little easier to see, is available outside. So we did want to show you what this might look like. So for example, you look in Town and Country, we have Waters Avenue here, and you can see current development pattern, residential with 6 homes per acre. With this bonus concept, this could look like residential with 10 homes per acre, and you can see the differences there. The homes are a little closer together, but again, focusing on those mobility improvements, looking at connected sidewalks, that sort of thing.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are in the infill, because I have a reality check for what's really happening with infill. With the infill, because you have these two different pictures, are they required to provide walkability and not sidewalks that end to nowhere, but the sidewalk that actually connects to the other walkability sites of the area, whether that's the neighborhood commercial or the schools? Is there a requirement, or are they just getting bonuses for the infill?
So we would be looking at the mobility improvements as a part of this, but it wouldn't be, if you utilize this, you would have to connect that, but I don't know that it would necessarily, you wouldn't have to go outside of your parcel to connect. So I understand the concern there.
Okay. So I can tell you 100%, 100% that the walkability is not happening. So I've been studying children's safe paths to school. I'm an actual expert in this area. I've spent a lot of time in the county with employees educating me and everything else. So we have infill happening, and they do the short sidewalk because they're only limited legally to their parcel, right? But the walkability is maybe the sidewalk that ends to nowhere, that's next to the road, and it's like not there, so. And what I was speaking about, how we do it and how we do infill and how we incentivize, this is what I'm speaking of. Okay. Because even if you increase the amount of houses in the small parcel, it doesn't really address the other things you're really going for. Like that's very important as part of that incentivization. So I don't know the language we need to use, but can we maybe like really try to develop some other language with it? Because it's not happening. They're just who wouldn't like that bonus? It's a good bonus. So it's just the other stuff that you think we're going to incentivize, we're not. It's just not happening.
I appreciate that feedback, and it's something that we can look at as we're looking at the language. This is a new bonus concept, so it's not something that's been utilized before. It's certainly something that we would be looking at as it was utilized. We take a look, are people actually using this if it were to be adopted as a part of the flu? But thank you for your comments, and we'll definitely consider them as we develop the policy language in more detail. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to agree with what Joe said, and from just living in the county most of my life, I also volunteered at elementary school on Barris, where I'd say 90% of the kids walk to school. And it's not because they love to get out on their bikes and walk, it's because they probably don't own a car and they're renting. So I think there's areas in the county where there's already people walking a lot to stores and everything, but the infrastructure is substandard and dangerous for them. And I don't know if this would be appropriate in this plan to consider where those walkable areas currently are, whether it's something in an urban area or a rural area, and in improving them with the county infrastructure, not depending on a developer to just build this sidewalk in front of their piece of property, but have those connections made ahead of time so that these kinds of things can happen.
And that's a great point. So one thing that we are coordinating with the Public Works Department on this in terms of mobility improvements and how we can loop them in on this policy language. So I think that's a great point in making sure that the connections can be made or prioritized with them as we move forward with this policy language. So we are coordinating with them and working on that. So thank you for your thoughts there.
So I just had an idea, maybe we can incentivize a mobility walkability along with the infill, that they go hand in hand. So you get a bonus for this, but you get another bonus if you do this. And you can give them a design choice, because the designs that are chosen are horrific most of the time. So if you give them the buffer, like there's a buffer between the pedestrian and the street, there's this and that, and then they get another bonus for that or another bonus for that. So then that's an then we incentivize where we really want to go instead of just the build. And then, if that's what it will take, then maybe giving them a mobility bonus. I don't know. It's just an idea.
Thank you. Yeah. And one thing I would like to note with our policy language on this, so we are kind of, this is within the comprehensive plan, which you all know is much more long range, but we are kind of towing that line with this language and being more specific on the incentives. So trying to find that right balance.
There was a point made emphatically in the first meeting that we had, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on your name. Mr. O'Brien, sir. And so Mr. O'Brien, sir, made it really emphatic about, and I think it was a commonly held sentiment in that first meeting, at least among the residents, maybe not among the real estate developers, was the idea that, and I think the centers become more viable if there's some way to build into the plan and some way to get the county commissioners to have the infrastructure in place instead of develop and hope the infrastructure catches up to it eventually. But somehow to don't approve it until we know exactly how we're going to make the infrastructure happen and when, so that the timings come together, that the development coincides with the completion of the infrastructure. I don't know how that happens, right? But I think that was, it becomes a livability issue for the people who live in the area already, right? That they don't have to live with the parking lot street for 2 years until finally enough is expanded. And the developer's long gone. They've finished, they've taken their money, they've walked away, right? So the center ideas are great, but if maybe it becomes a mechanism like what you're talking about too, build some incentives in there so that the infrastructure gets done a little bit before the development is completed. So before people start moving to that neighborhood, it's all ready to go, et cetera. So the people who live in the area don't suffer. Then that doesn't talk to the fact that, I've talked to the staff a little bit about, we talk about community plans in one way, and the residents hear that community plan, but the decisions get made based upon some sort of legal and professional city planning language, where FR6 and FA and all of this, but the community plans aren't written in that language. It's all, and so when you talk early on about, well, we want to build the kind of, we want to have the kind of development that the community wants. But these decisions were made 10 years ago before the people moved into that community. That's true in Apollo Beach, where like everyone spoke against this one development that was proposed in our area. And the more I listened to the meeting online, the more I figured out, oh, well, this is a done deal. This was a done deal 10 years ago. This decision was made, that area was zoned for high density commercial 10 years ago. It's just no one knew it because no one attended those meetings. And the residents were waiving the community plan. But this doesn't coincide with the community plan for Apollo Beach, which is sort of stick with the character. We want a town center, and there's no real town center developing in Apollo Beach and all that. And I figured, oh, those community plans, there seems to be like this cognitive dissonance between the community plans and the way decisions get made. But we still talk about community plans like they're some grassroots kind of decision-making process, and they don't seem to be. But I mean, I realize that's 2 points, but I just remember it was really emphatic what Mr. O'Brien, sir, made at that first meeting, right? That it was something that was real important to him from experience, but it seemed to be widely echoed in the room at the time. That yes, that try to get development and infrastructure to coincide, and not one try to catch up to the other.
And the point that you made with the community plans, I mean, they are a tool. They're something that we look at for our consistency reviews. But in the case of something being already zoned the way it was zoned, I don't know that it would the community plan won't supersede that. But and another point, just to add to that, thinking through, the Planning Commission, a lot of the feedback that I've been getting in various outreach meetings like this one, the Planning Commission is a recommending body. Our staff look at the plans, we cite our policies, we bring it to the Planning Commission, we say whether we find something consistent or inconsistent. Sometimes the Planning Commission agrees with stuff and sometimes they don't. And then ultimately that decision with the case of the county plan is made by the Board of County Commissioners. So we, do our job in looking at the plan, but ultimately the decision is with the elected officials.
I appreciate it, and I was just kidding. I hope you know that. But, I think it's a good time to probably reiterate what he's referring to, what I brought up the last time, because I have brought that point up for years, and it seems to fall on deaf ears. And in the process of this, these steps that you're taking to make changes, I'm adamant that we need to include in that process, we need to have criteria that you guys look at. And where I'm coming from with my comments are I've reviewed and looked at rezonings and rezoning requests and went before the zoning hearing masters and the county commissioners, et cetera. And I can't tell you the number of times that I went in and read through the material and the Planning Commission staff says, transportation's inferior, schools aren't there, services aren't there, but we recommend approval. And I'm adamant about putting in the plan, in the land development code, the comprehensive plan, or wherever it needs to be. There must be some ready, when you look at what you're doing and what you're reviewing, there needs to be a set of criteria that you look at and says, is it ready for, this development? And in the criteria, does infrastructure exist? Is transportation adequate? Are schools there? Are services there, like sheriff and county services, et cetera, water and sewage, those kind of things? There needs to be a checklist. And if you don't check yes, that all of those are existing and ready, and the area is ready for that development, then I think it should be illegal for you to say, we recommend approval. And I'd like to see that in either the land development, I'm not sure where it belongs, to have that criteria. And it doesn't need to be stringent, it just needs to be reasonable and common sense.
Thank you for your feedback on that.
I second that motion.
Isn't it nice to have the mics so you can, it feels very official. I know you all didn't necessarily want to be around the table, but.
I would just like to make a comment to his question real quick. That when staff reviews, we do have to rely on the county transportation department. There are technical experts because they know the transportation manual and the requirements backwards and forwards. So we rely on them to tell us, is it meeting the requirements or not? So when they tell us something's meeting all the transportation requirements, that's what we do put in our report. But it sounds like what you're saying is there needs to be something in the comp plan that's more detailed and something that isn't just relying on county staff comments. Am I getting that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There, like I say, it's a simple checklist that I
Yeah.
believe that you would have to go through and you'd have to verify through your research and through the work that you do that verifies that, is the transportation system adequate to support the proposed development that's being, the existing transportation element. When I look at the rezonings and I look at the files in the county, in your files and read through it, I read the reviews and it says, the reviews are, we looked at it, the road's inadequate, inferior. I mean, all kind of words I've read through, inadequate, inferior, can't sustain, needs major work or overhaul. And then at the end of your comment, it says, we recommend approval. Well, I think it just bothers me. There's no way that I could recommend approval for anything that's not ready to accommodate the proposed development that's being proposed. And that's what I would like to see, the burden placed back on the county, the planning commission and staff, that makes them, they have to determine that it's ready. And if it is ready, then they can say, we recommend approval. If it's not ready, if they can't check the box and say it's ready, then I don't believe they should be able to recommend approval.
Well, I'll just, I don't want us to spend a ton of time on this because I think we'll need to come back with how we can respond. We definitely heard loud and clear at the last meeting that issue for sure, and need to work through not only internal to the planning commission, but coordinating with folks like the county attorney's office, because there are requirements in state statute that limit what we can and cannot impose upon development, which we talked a bit about at the last meeting, some of the changes in state law that took away transportation concurrency. And so, for example, in the RP2 study that I know you're very familiar with, we put some policy language about when is a project premature. That language is still under an administrative challenge and working its way through the court system. So, we try to balance all the interests and make sure that what we're putting in the comp plan, we believe is abiding by the statutes, because it's not our intent to get the county in a bunch of lawsuits or anything else that is also expensive and slows everything down. So at any rate, there's a lot we need. We'll come back on that topic with more specifics about how we're going to look at that in the plan. There is some language in the plan. It's very dated. It's since before the state law changed. And so we have to address that as part of this process. So we'll be back on it.
I'm going to work on changing that state law because
I like that.
I
like that.
I am, because I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, that when the transportation concurrency is what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
I think, and I quite frankly think Hillsborough County should be on my team and work hard to get it, remanded back the way it used to be, because it's just bad planning. And we shouldn't continue going forward doing things we know aren't right.
Thank you for that feedback. Yeah. So I do have a few more slides. I'm going to go through these, hopefully answer any questions. So I wanted to give you a couple more visuals. Just this is Fletcher Avenue. You can see residential with 20 units per acre, and then you can visualize on the right-hand side here, residential with 32 units per acre or 35 units per acre. And that area, again, the university area, looking at just a slight uptick in the density. Here we have Palm River with 78th Street. Residential area, existing conditions, 9 homes per acre. And that slight uptick could allow things like townhomes or duplexes, 14 units per acre, 15 units per acre. You can see some examples there, what that could look like. So I think this is something that you all have hit on a bit tonight, but density in the right areas allows preservation in others. So this is something that we're really trying to drive home, looking at that infill redevelopment, inward focus on what we can do within the urban service area. And I did want to, again, outline, you can ignore the part about streamlining process changes. I think that was just a portion that got moved. But the outreach and engagement for the Centers and Connections concept, again, we've looked at that those inward growth priorities. We're hearing you loud and clear about maximizing an existing infrastructure. And I will get back to you all on the definition of that we used in our survey. Again, we had map feedback on that map you saw earlier, 5,600 data points and over 900 comments. We're in the process of analyzing that. And then we've had public meetings. We went out May 16th in person and Brandon to talk about the overall update and specific the CNC topic. May 23rd, we had a virtual meeting that was recorded, again, talking about this topic. We also went specifically to Palm River with our staff that are working on the community plan update there on May 24th for their CPAC meeting. We've also utilized a visual preference exercise at each of these meetings. Those boards are available if you haven't had a chance to participate and you'd like to. I will give you some dots and you can look at these visual preference exercise items that I will go over in just 1 second. So you'll see out there some of the images that we have, some of the things that we're hoping to get out of this policy language, requirements, or things that would come out of people utilizing this language in the bonus structure. So connected sidewalks, crosswalks, transit service, protected bike lanes, reduced speed limits, commercial development, looking at different types of housing, duplexes, townhomes, mixed-use development, mid-rise development, public green space. I will say in Brandon, lots of folks really like the public green space. And so I know we're over tonight. We're over past 7 o'clock, but we would love your feedback. So if you have any thoughts on the map, you can take a look at the one outside, or I have printouts that I can hand to you. On the description of the bonus approach, I think we already got into this. You're talking about the incentives. So will this be utilized? What would make it work? And any other considerations for the policy language and requirements? Again, I think we've chatted with you about that a little bit tonight, but if you have any other feedback or questions, I'd love to take them. And also it's my contact information is not on here, but I believe it's on our flu project page. So if you have any questions that you think of later, you're thinking about this tonight before you go to bed and something pops in your head, please contact me. My co-lead is Elizabeth Watkins in the back. So we'd love to answer your questions because I know it's a lot of information and a newer policy concept, something that we're still working through. So yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Looking at the examples you have there, in particular the mid-rise type apartments, I guess it had indication of, slight density increases.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I'm not sure the magnitude of the density increase is really going to buy you anything in terms of additional development based off of the, density bonuses of that size. It just, whatever the additional requirements might be, whether it's better sidewalks or whatever, whatever it is that would have to be in place to access those density bonuses. What we're looking at right now in the industry is incredible increases in prices. And when we're talking about infill in particular, the land is extra expensive, and the type of build you have to create to go into infill is the more expensive type of multifamily development. So if you're looking at increasing density from like 20 to 30, you're not going to incentivize what you think you're going to incentivize.
Okay. So you would say that it should be large, we should be looking at larger increases?
Exactly.
Okay. We are also, just to add to that, we're looking at the capability to stack bonuses and having a maximum with that. So there is the possibility that someone could utilize this if they're in the right area, along with another bonus, affordable housing, any of the other ones that we have, and potentially maximize to a higher density that you're talking about. And that's something that's not currently in the plan today that we're adding.
That could be helpful, depending on how that's ultimately, put together.
Thank you.
I have a comment more than a question. So my concern is, so I see the apartments, the larger apartments, that density is actually like double or triple from what it like originally started, because they increase the height so much when they do that infill. But my concern is that the infill is being offered, even though it's in an unincorporated urban service area, it's making suburban look urban. It's adding urban to suburban. So we have a huge hospital at a quadruple height of any other building in surrounding Bloomingdale and 301, right? And it's just, and it stands out. It stands out because it's so much higher and so much bigger than any of the other office buildings or the area. So there is concern. My concern is in the infill bonuses, when we talk about it should fit the community, that's being ignored for the infill. And then we're going to have a suburban area look urban, completely urban. And quite frankly, Brandon used to be rural. 60 used to be rural not that long ago. And I understand we develop and we move, but there's a good way to do it. And when something is beautiful and something is walkable, that brings business. That brings business. If I can go and walk along and go to my neighborhood stores and my commercial development and stay in my neighborhood, it always drives business. It's always a good thing for our community. But if we just do infill that turns suburban areas and some of the older suburban areas and make it look urban and it doesn't fit, is my only concern in unincorporated Hillsborough. But I don't know if I have an answer to that in the language of how we do the infill, of where we can make it fit more into the community. And then speaking about the development and expense, we get it. But the buyer as well with the interest, I mean, the buyers are only being offered townhomes with infill. The single family homes are unaffordable.
I'll just say, I can't speak to the single family home development. My focus is, my association is the Bay Area Apartment Association. So we're looking at our members, not exclusively, but primarily are focused on, 50 units, 100 units, 200 unit size communities. And those are and when we're talking about infill, again, you've got a lot of challenges to build those types of communities. You need minimum 6-8 acres to get a normal size apartment community. And from the data that we're looking at earlier, that's short supply. So I get your point. I don't have any information to talk specifically about single family development, but as it relates to multifamily, the bonuses they're talking about here today would not, I think, make economic sense for a developer to come in and bring more units.
This is a good conversation, and thank you for your comments. It's definitely something that we're writing down and considering. One thing is, I mentioned this earlier, we are kind of towing the line between what should be in the comp plan and what should be in the code. So that's something that we're working on with the language, and the comp plan doesn't regulate height. So that's a portion of that. I also wanted to mention going back and looking at these photos to show you the areas. So as this gentleman over here mentioned earlier, this is a smaller increase. So this is the USF area where it has that density. So whereas if we're looking in town and country, it's still small. So I understand your concerns, but just wanted to try to alleviate that if I can, that, everywhere is not going to look like the USF area necessarily. Yes, ma'am.
Right. So this may be outside of the box a little much, but we're talking about walkability and access and safety. And somewhere it feels like in the land development code or in the process, there are a few things we might be able to change, but we need to set context for it in the comprehensive plan. And those two things are, one is we're building sidewalks, but we want everybody to be moving around and using them and so forth. So could we look at building trails instead of sidewalks in certain areas? So that was, you see bikes on it and more people use them and so forth, and it's more inviting. And secondly, because of the logistical problems, obviously, with if I only build the trail in front of my section and somebody else then, builds their part and somebody else builds their part, if we could set this up so that there could be funding that went into a pot, and then once you had the funding, you went in and you actually built a contiguous trail in an area, as opposed to everybody building their little piece. So by the time the next piece gets built, my piece is already crumbling or deteriorated or it doesn't fit. Might be a way for us to kind of find ways to get real segments put together that people actually are using for what we want them to be able to use it for. I take my cart, I go to the store, all those things. I can't have that many people on a sidewalk doing that if we really want to have these livable areas. So
I appreciate you sharing that and the out-of-the-box thinking there. With trails, I think it would depend on the right-of-way, obviously, in that situation, but do appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking. Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions unrelated to each other. I've been saving them. The first question I have, does there exist a map of Hillsborough County that would show what properties are zoned by what category? Does that exist?
Yes, the Hillsborough County has an online viewer, and you can see everything, what every property is zoned for.
Can you look at it collectively? Like, can I look at a 10-mile radius?
Yeah,
or-
you can zoom out or in however the radius you want to look at.
How do we find that?
Well, if it's helpful to everybody, I think last PAT meeting I sent a follow-up email with like links, so I can do that again and send that link and add some of the stuff we've been talking about
That would
today.
be terrific. I would appreciate. That was my first question. Yay. The second one is, earlier we were talking about properties that were zoned, that have been perhaps zoned for something out of the ordinary. Say I'm just going to pick on one. Say it's an AR area and somebody has a old PD from 1907, whatever, Is there any potential consideration for a sunset clause? If a property has been laying vacant for 10, 15, 20 years, it seems to me that at some point that should dissipate. And the second part of that is, if property is zoned commercial, I read this someplace not too long ago, and I don't remember where it was, but it was in statutes. By the way, there are states that do have sunset clauses. Many states do. If a piece of property is zoned commercial and you tear down the building, it gets burned out or it gets flooded or whatever. I read someplace that, I think it was in Florida statutes, that if you don't restore it within a year, it becomes vacated. Is that correct?
I'm not entirely, I don't know that if it is zoned commercial and the building's burned down, I believe they can go ahead and build commercial again because that's consistent with their zoning. Now, what there are timeframes on is if you have a non-conforming use, so you have a commercial structure, but your zoning is, let's say, residential, and so you're not conforming to your zoning, I think there are limitations on what you can build back and the time frame in which the use might have to go away if it's dormant for a certain amount of time.
Vacated.
Yeah. So that is something that is in Hillsborough County Code about the non-conforming uses. But if it's allowed under their zoning, they would be able to build back, I believe. Your question about the sunsetting of PDs is a good one. It is something that there are communities across the country that do. At this time, the county did in maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, they added in a provision into the land development code that the site plan for the PD and the access points sunset. So you still, it doesn't take away their entitlements to, let's say, 200 units on that piece of property, and this is only for new PDs that were going forward since that time. So since whatever
July.
date that
It
was.
July 2021.
Yeah, something like that. You know more than I do. That going forward from that point, the PD, after a certain amount of time, if somebody wants to build on it, they have to come back in and have a reassessment that those access points and are still valid and still work, because there was a recognition that as other things get built around, the transportation changes and that might need to be reassessed over time. But in terms of a more general blanket sunsetting of the approval, no, that's not something that we have in Hillsborough County. It would need to go into the code, the land development code, as opposed to in the comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Just to follow up before you back away from Mike. So
Don't go
if
away.
that was something that the community wanted to comment on, who makes those decisions about that code that would have to be changed?
Well,
if it's not
ultimately,
this process?
the Board of County Commissioners, they would direct county staff to make those types of land development code amendments. That's what happened in 2020, 2021. Commissioner White at that time brought forward this issue of needing to look at the transportation again after a few years and directed staff to bring forward land development code amendments.
Okay, well, as you know, that traffic is just one little tiny piece, and here's, we're developing a really wonderful future land use component, but if somebody who has something zoned from 20 years ago is totally incompatible and it's not getting revisited, that's a problem. So I'm going to write my county commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your feedback.
I have
Oh,
one quick
yes,
question,
sorry.
and it's an overall arching question. It's the 350,000 number that we hear. Is that for the whole county, or is that for growth in the urban service area?
Believe that was
Unincorporated.
county.
So Tampa, the city of Tampa is dealing with its own number of anticipated growth. So like when I say, well, I would like us to have the goal of not expanding unincorporated, the urban service area, which means, and we talked about this earlier, but try to push some of the growth back into Tampa if possible through incentives, et cetera. But are they thinking, we can't accommodate this growth. We need to push some of this growth out to the urban service area. And we're, are we both playing against each other in that sense?
No, I don't think Tampa's thinking that they're trying to push it all to the unincorporated area. But I also think that they have their own challenges with where to redevelop, where to focus within the city, the infrastructure issues, mobility issues, ways to get people around. So those are the conversations we're having with City of Tampa residents in forums like this, to talk about where are the potential spots where we can continue to intensify. And they have quite a bit of the city that is impacted by the coastal areas. And so trying not, that's one of the goals is in parts of the area, like the peninsula of South Tampa. There's a lot of concern from residents in that area about hurricane evacuation and the impacts of the coastal area on their area. So, again, it's a balancing act in the city, just like it is in the unincorporated area. We try to look at those population projections every 5 years. We take a look at it, we update it, we look at how our policy has done. Have we moved the needle? And honestly, we've done quite well historically in terms of focusing growth in the urban service area, beginning to focus growth back into redevelopment in the city of Tampa. So can we continue to move the needle? So planning is, as somebody said earlier, a bit incremental. And so while we look long range, we have to continually update the plan to adjust because, for example, the plan that we wrote for the city of Tampa in 2016 had quite a bit of focus on, we thought we were going to have mass transit connecting West Shore downtown and the university area. And we put a lot of potential population growth in transit-oriented development along that area. And here we are 7 years later, and we've not made a lot of movement towards that. So we need to reassess whether or not that's the right place and the right amount of growth to put in those areas as we're updating their plan. So, we have to keep adjusting. Yeah.
Sorry, I think I'm done, and then I think of something else. I know that you don't have anything to do with planning for water supplies, but Tampa Bay Water is the regional water supplier, and they're currently updating their comprehensive water use plan for this increased growth. And one of the areas that they are concerned about is the growth in South Hillsborough County. Of course, they're servicing more than just that area, but that's in the works right now. So those of you who are interested in water infrastructure, I've gone to one meeting that they've had, and there's one more coming up, but so I don't have a whole lot of information, but I could point.
We're out of water.
Yeah, I can point you to what their projects are. They're planning to do
happy
new well
for-
fields, increasing water supply. They need 10 to 15 million gallons per day more water into the future. So they're identifying specific projects right now to increase the water supplies.
Yeah, and we do coordinate with them. It's a requirement in state law that we have a 10-year water supply plan into the comprehensive plan that was last updated, I think, in 2022. And that gets updated, I think, every 6 or 7 years. I don't recall off the top of my head, but so we do work with them. They provide comment on different projects and they will get an opportunity to review what we put forward as language in this land use update. So it's a bit of an iterative process. They look at what we're projecting in population and then make some plans, and then, we look at what they're planning and then see what we can, accommodate, that sort of thing. There's a lot of coordination. It might not always seem like it, but there is.
I wanted to thank you all for your feedback on this topic. It's definitely something that we are continually taking in your feedback and your comments as we work on the policy language, and we hope that it can be part of that incremental step to redirecting growth to areas where it's more maintainable and desirable for the community. So thank you very much for your thoughts. And of course, if you have any questions, my contact information is on our website. I know if you think of something later, please feel free to email or call me. Thank you.
Real quick before y'all go, first of all, I do want to say y'all have me really excited and passionate now. I just love all of this fantastic discussion. So thank you so much for spending your time with us. We do have some upcoming meetings like Andrea mentioned earlier on June 22nd and June 26th. That information is also on our Plan Hillsborough website. We will be discussing the same presentation that you'll be seeing at the August 8th PAT meeting. We hope you can make that. And just another quick look at where we are right now. We're right at the beginning stages of this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at any time. We'd love to sit down with you and talk about more specifics. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and we will be available if you have any other questions. Thank you.
547. 74364. 4364 is